Hello YouTube, and welcome to another late night video from yours truly, MerlinRavenSong. Every now and then I get emails from people and they basically want to know my musical influences. And I've done a video on this before, but I think I did it with my old webcam, which was not as good as this webcam. So those of you who want to compare and contrast that video with this video, feel free to check that old video out. I don't know exactly where it's at. This is one of my uploaded videos. I have quite a bit of videos here on YouTube now, so you gotta hunt for it. And to tell you the truth, I don't feel like hunting for it because it is 1:53 in the morning. So last thing I want to do is go do my videos and hunt for an old video. So you can consider this as the updated version of the older video that I uploaded probably about a year ago or so. So how did I get involved in music? Well, I believe it first started when I was a kid, and I was told that my relatives liked the blues, and one of the things that they would do when I was a kid is they would blast this blues music on the radio or record player or whatever, and I would just be crawling around listening to the blues, and I would fall asleep by the speaker, and I was just, a young kid, and I really dug it as a young kid growing up, and it's just pretty much stayed with me all my life. When I first started listening to rock and roll, I liked the blues artists that were doing rock and roll, the rock and rollers that who were really influenced by the blues. I'm talking about the Stones, Led Zeppelin, all those 60s and 70s bands that were really blues influenced. Because I first started listening to the blues, and then when I heard rock and roll, I heard the blues, and that's why I love rock and roll to this day. There's an old saying, I think it's a song too, it goes, the blues had a baby and it's called rock and roll. And those of you who know anything about rock and roll know that it came from the blues. So that's why I love rock and roll today. One of the first bands I remember listening to as I got older was the Jackson 5. I was a big fan of the Jackson 5s when I was growing up. And I believe the first concert I went to was the Jackson 5. Actually, I'm pretty sure that was the first concert I went to. At least that's the first one I remember. They played the State Fair here in Michigan, so you can imagine how long ago that was. But I remember going to the State Fair and checking out the Jackson 5 back in the early 70s, and it was a great show. I still remember parts of that show. The reason why I remember it is because the Jackson 5 had a cartoon out. Those of you who might not be aware, they had a cartoon out, and the cartoon was sort of like, it kind of reminds you of the Cosby, the Bill Cosby cartoons that came out in the I believe that was like the early 80s or maybe late 70s. But it was all Jackson 5. It was all Michael, and they would sing and dance and do their little routine, and it was great stuff. So I remember during the concert they were advertising this cartoon that came out, and it was great. The concert was great. I still remember parts of it, even though I was just yay high. Then as I got older, the band that really caught my attention was Earth, Wind and Fire. And I think looking back, it's sort of like a precursor of the fact that I'm a pagan now, because their music was very mystical. They would always talk about ancient Egypt, There was a lot of mysticism in their music, and maybe it has some type of influence on me. It's definitely part of the reason why I'm interested in ancient Egypt, and I'm interested in Kemet and the belief systems of ancient Egypt. And some of those belief systems I incorporate into my spirituality. So, as I said, maybe that's a sort of like a precursor of my paganism as of today. But Earth, Wind and Fire is a great band, and I know every now and then they still tour. I have to actually look up and see what Maurice White is doing, because I don't think he's touring with the band. Last time I heard, he was sick, so I definitely want to keep up with what's happening with him. But that was one of the first bands, other than the Jackson 5, that I went really crazy over. And I remember there was a contest on a radio station. I believe it was WDRQ here in Michigan, and they wanted to know what band. No, they wanted to know what artists wrote or either co-wrote the song "Sun Goddess," and I remember it was Maurice White and the members of Earth, Wind and Fire. So I remember calling the radio station and answered the question correctly, and I won the Earth, Wind and Fire library. So all of the Earth, Wind and Fire albums that was out during that time I got, and it was really cool because I got to go down to the WDRQ radio station, and I was able to pick up those albums. So that was really cool. And I think I was just in I don't think I even was in middle school when I won that. I think I was maybe even pre junior high school. So that was really cool. I got to go down to the radio stations and check it out, and I never will forget that. I think just a little trivia, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the old WDRQ building now is a strip joint, which is kind of funny, but I don't know, I have to check that out. But last time I looked, it's like, what is that? Is that anyway? Then, as time progressed, I got interested in the band Parliament Funkadelic, and that was the second big concert that I went to. I saw them back in the 70s for the first time, and that concert was awesome. Part of that concert I don't remember, because that was back in my experimental days with the Sweet Leaf, if you get what I'm talking about, the happy cigarettes. But that was still a great concert. That was back when George Clinton was landing the spaceship on stage, and it was spectacular. Those of you who didn't see Parliament Funkadelic back in the 70s and the early 80s really missed something. His concerts today are really cool, but back when artists could really afford to bring, really big productions on stage, those concerts were like priceless. You go to a concert today, they're still good, but not that many artists can really afford to give you all the stage acts that was happening in the 60s and 70s and the early 80s. It's not affordable anymore, and that's really a shame. Only artists that I can think of that can afford to do that now is like a band like Kiss, who pretty much have to give you a big stage show because of the nature of the band. But if you want good seats to this show, you have to spend like $200 or $300, which I think is ridiculous. But I can kind of understand where they're coming from for charging that much money, because it costs so much money, especially during these recession times, to carry all that stuff on stage. So if you can afford it, go check them out. Then later on, I started listening to the big three. That was Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, and Jimi Hendrix. I fell in love with those three artists. And part of the reason why I like them is because all three of those artists were blues based. They were really influenced by the blues and R&B. Jim Morrison was a fan of Otis Redding, and he was a fan of blues. I know that for a fact. Jimi Hendrix, of course, was a fan of the blues, and Janis Joplin thought of herself as a blues singer. So that was sort of like a natural progression for me to start listening to those guys and ladies. Then later on, I got influenced by jazz, and first it was jazz fusion, and that was the music of John McLaughlin, Al Di Meola, and Return to Forever, and bands like that. Billy Cobham, all those musicians was just awesome. And I remember seeing John McLaughlin back in the, I think it was the late 90s or early 90s, and he's awesome live. If you ever have an opportunity to see John McLaughlin, go check him out, because he's awesome. But he was definitely an influence on me. Then later on, Deep Purple and Yngwie Malmsteen had a big influence on me. I actually remember the first time I heard Yngwie Malmsteen. I was in a car, and they were playing one of the songs off the album Rising Force, and I remember listening to it, and I kept saying to myself, this kind of sounds like Ritchie Blackmore, but I don't think it's Ritchie Blackmore, because he never played that technical. And I remember listening to it, and it's like, I gotta find out who this guy is. And of course, later on, I did find out who he was, and had an opportunity to meet Yngwie Malmsteen a couple of times, and that was an experience of itself. So I got interested in, to the progressive hard rock. Yngwie Malmsteen, Deep Purple, Steve Vai. Had an opportunity to meet Steve Vai a couple of times. Cool guy, one of the greatest guys you ever want to meet in person. I had an opportunity to meet him. I've always been a fan of his music. Then later on, when I attended college at Wayne State University, I got turned on to classical artists like Stravinsky and Bartok and John Cage, and those guys, and also the classical guitar players, Anna Vidovitz, John Williams, and one of my favorites, Julian Bream. I love Julian Bream. I think Julian Bream is like one of my favorite classical guitar players of all time. The reason why I like Julian Bream is because he brings a lot of emotion out in his guitar playing, and he's just beyond awesome. But those classical artists were definitely an influence on me. Then I went to my punk phase. I started listening to bands like Black Flag and The Exploited. I saw The Exploited in concert, and it was one of the craziest concerts I've ever went to, and I really enjoyed that. Then I kind of went back and I started listening to a lot of jazz when I was in college, standard jazz like Charlie Parker and John Coltrane, and of course Miles Davis and those guys. Anyway, this is just an introduction to the music that I listened to when I was growing up, and the music that had an influence on my life and the music that I create. Alright, I'm going to end this video now before it cuts off. I'm not sure how YouTube is handling my account. It says that I have I can do videos more than 15 minutes, but I notice sometimes when I'm recording, the video will just cut off after 15 minutes, so, or before 15 minutes. So I'm going to cut it short here. So hope I answered some of you guys' questions, and if you have any more questions, feel free to leave a comment. Alright, until next time, love is the law, and peace.